Welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. Unleashed is produced by Umbrex, which connects you with the world's top independent management consultants. I'm your host, Will Bachman. I'm very excited to be here today with Mike Freed, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Mirion Technologies. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Phil. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Mike, give me an overview of Mirion Technologies, what your firm does.
Sure. Yeah. So Mirion Technologies is the global leader in radiation detection and measurement. So as a company, our mission is to protect people and property and the environment from the harmful effects of ionizing radiation. So we support nuclear power plants, the medical community with a number of applications, Homeland Security and military, government agencies, labs and research for some big science applications, and increasingly we're doing more and more of decontamination and decommissioning work of sites that are being shut down, DOE sites and the like. And last year, I should say, through some mergers and acquisitions and product development, we're expanding that mission more broadly in the medical space. So we're getting more involved with human health and radiation therapy to support cancer treatments, which is a strategic initiative of ours that we're really focused on lately. So overall, we have about 2,500 personnel across 30 sites globally, so relatively globally dispersed, and we're a private equity owned company.
All right, cool. For folks that don't have training in radiation detection and so forth, what are the major different categories of radiation and the types of detectors that you manufacture and sell?
Absolutely. And the best way to describe that, I think, would just be through some of the applications. And so we do a lot of health physics work. So if you worked in a nuclear power plant and you were in a maintenance area, the primary concern is when individuals are in that space, that they're monitoring the levels of radiation exposure that they're receiving, as well as making sure that surface contaminants don't leave the space. So from the nuclear power application, one of the key product categories we sell are contamination and clearance equipment, we call it. So picture an airport X-ray machine that you go through at security, but instead measuring radiation. So when you leave the work site, you can make sure that you're not spreading contamination. Or while you're in the plant working, what's called dosimetry. So it would be measuring the levels of radiation you're receiving to make sure it's safe and you're not passing healthy limits when you're doing that work. We also do broader just radiation measurement for the plant itself. So we have a couple divisions that support broader reactor monitoring systems, detectors inside and outside of the reactor core to measure health of the reactor. In the medical community, if you've ever gone and gotten an X-ray, you'll see the X-ray technicians, if they're actually following what they're supposed to be following, they'll be wearing a badge, they call it, which is measuring their dose. And they take that badge and either ship it back to us and we do the measurement and dose report for them and send it back as a service. Or we have a new product that is Bluetooth based where they can, it's called Instadose, so they can just keep their same badge and it would go through an anchor uplink to instant reads, so they can measure at intervals that they require for their medical facility and do that digitally, which is a key breakthrough. For military and Homeland Security, we do a lot of products that either help monitor and track to make sure that there's no transport of dirty bomb material in through ports or other points of entry. We supply dosimetry and detectors to the military for potential use if there was ever any type of nuclear combat that they would experience. And I should say in the labs and research markets, we have high purity germanium detectors that are incredibly accurate that can help with research for everything from the work on discovery and analysis of dark matter all the way to we've been involved with NASA and some of the research that's been done on Mars and that type of application.
Wow.
When we get to decontamination and decommissioning, so if you think of Department of Energy sites that are that need to characterize their waste, so do work to basically remediate the site, we have pretty advanced systems that will aid those sites in the characterization of the remaining impact from those sites processing nuclear materials over time.
What does characterize the waste mean?
So basically, with highly accurate detectors, you can determine which isotopes you're dealing with, and can really get into more specificity, not just the presence of radiation, but down to the specific isotope level. And just broadly speaking, I think the layman term way to manage that is different waste requires different types of release,
Mm-hmm.
and different types of processing. And when you can get highly accurate with the systems that use high purity germanium detectors, you can actually get very specific a very specific read on what you're dealing with, and therefore develop the protocols and the actions required to clean up the site.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, my own experience with this was first a few years in the nuclear Navy, when we had, I'm sure much less sophisticated equipment than your firm has now, which was, we were worried about, alpha, which, and radiation, right? Neutron radiation, beta gamma radiation. And, some of those are very serious, but you can block them just with a sheet of paper. But the neutron, you'd need several inches of lead shielding, right? So, there's different types, and I'm sure that the detectors that you have right now are way more sophisticated than our Navy days.
Yeah, and it's funny, some of my first jobs in the Navy when I graduated college was working with this type of equipment, and there are many days at Mirion where I wish, when I'm having conversations with some of our nuclear physicists, that I wish that I remembered a lot more from nuclear power school than I actually do still today. But yeah, it's fascinating to see where the technology has come in the I guess 20 years since I was using it in the Navy.
So for the Homeland Security part, that's something you see in the news a bit, about concerns about a dirty bomb coming in, just maybe even in a 40-foot container. What's being done at the ports to make sure that that doesn't happen? Do those containers go through some kind of big, sort of like an, like you have at the airport, that to see if there's anything inside, or how are they determining if there's any kind of dirty bombs coming into the country?
Yeah, there's most ports have very large port monitors that could monitor an entire container, or obviously hundreds of containers. At the airports, I think it kind of varies by region. We have our equipment set up in a number of airports globally, and some airports prioritize luggage monitoring over personnel, people monitoring, that some airports have started to set up, in addition to the X-ray systems that you typically go through, set up systems that complement that as well. And it's one of those things where you see a high degree of variability across governmental kind of prep for that, and a lot of it has been funding based over time. The U.S. has gone through various stages of that. I think it's becoming an increasing priority. And I'd say the other thing that that they're doing a lot more of in the U.S. It started with what they called the Securing the Cities initiative, mm-hmm. where they wanted to make sure that they both prepared cities to monitor. Take large events, for example. So if you had the Super Bowl or a large event, you want to make sure that you had an ability to tell if there was anything, any risks to the response afterwards. If there was a dirty bomb, does the city have enough dosimetry and detectors to be able to manage the response to something like that? And we've seen a lot more business lately in that category, with basic handheld detectors for first responders. we did a lot of work with the Indianapolis 500, which has 300,000 spectators over time, and these are the types of events where you want to make sure you're monitoring for this threat in a fairly non-obvious way. So if a police officer is walking around with something that looked like a detector from Back to the Future,
Right.
with the nuclear symbol on it, stuff that would probably be concerning. So you have a lot more of the kind of backpack type. There's detectors in backpacks or drones or handhelds that look more like cell phones, and they're getting more sophisticated, and it's becoming more of a funding priority, and so it's becoming a bigger part of our business over time.
Yeah, I mean, with the coronavirus pandemic, it kind of illustrates that we weren't really prepared in terms of obviously having enough personal protective equipment, and and obviously the testing has been a big issue. It kind of makes me think, well, geez, I sort of had assumed the government would have that kind of material, and for some kind of dirty bomb attack, I assumed that the government would just sort of whip out of some warehouse all the detectors and full body contamination suits and so forth, but maybe not. So it sounds like there's maybe some variation in how much cities are prepared for something like that.
Yeah, I think so. And well, I tell you that I think in my 4 years at Mirion, it's exciting to see that it's becoming more of a priority. The government is managing some more central procurement on these types of, at least the detection equipment. But it does go city by city, and they're prioritizing the larger cities first. And we really focus at Mirion to make sure that we're making products that are also both cost effective, but also easy to use. So one of our more recent products that we put out, even though you and I are a little stale from our time in the Navy, you could use this what we call PRD, personal handheld device called our AccuRad, which we just launched. But you could use that. It looks more like a cell phone. It's very easy to use because if you think about it, the larger cities have health physics departments, and they have trained police and firefighters that can handle radiation protection. In the smaller cities, you really have to arm them with equipment that's easy to use, because they don't benefit from the funding or the size or scale to have radiation trained personnel. And so there's a little bit of a training there. There's a little bit of a supply and readiness perspective. But ultimately, I think if we ever saw something like that, you'd see a little bit of a Fukushima type result where everyone kind of scrambles and tries to divert resources to the impacted area. I guess the one thing that makes it a little bit different than the pandemic is just what you said. The government could centrally procure, like they do, a lot of this equipment and then distribute it rapidly to the impacted area, because this would be geographically focused, right? So
right. Okay. Talk to me a little bit about tell me a little bit more about the health physics part. How radiation is used in health. I mean, I suppose radiation therapy and so forth for cancer, but what are the different ways that radioactive materials are used in healthcare facilities?
Yeah, so and this is an area that we're growing into. Like I said before, it used to be we were more focused on dosimetry for hospitals. We just acquired a company last summer that does dose calibration for thyroid uptake systems, or a dose calibrator for isotope therapies for cancer treatments. So basically, before you administer the dose, if I'm trying to be really simple about it, you would just want to make sure that you're administering the right amount. So there's calibration systems that measure and ensure that that's accurate. Obviously, in the broader medical space, a space that we don't deal with a whole lot yet, there's radiation beam therapy, where you do a lot of quality control and patient modeling to make sure you're delivering the right type of dose and the beam for the treatment. There's also areas where you can develop products for the monitoring of the medical space where these things are being administered, right? So when you do brachytherapy, for example, you're administering a seed of highly radioactive seed to a specific spot in the body, and you have to use radiation measurement to ensure that that's delivered to the right spot, and then also retrieved and clear of the patient in the treatment room before it's safe for the patient and any medical care professionals. So there's a number of applications, and that's actually an area that's really exciting for us, just because the focus and mission of the business for so long has been to protect people from the harmful effects of ionizing radiation, and to get involved with also advancing and restoring human health through products that support radiation therapy for cancer, and using our harnessing our knowledge and expertise in that space. It's really an exciting expansion of the business.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's talk a little about how you are keeping your employees safe during the coronavirus pandemic. Do you still have manufacturing facilities that are continuing to operate and still shipping, devices around? What sort of steps have you taken?
Sure. Yeah, it's as I think everyone's experience has been quite the crisis to manage through, but we've been grateful for the ability to keep people safe and our business continuity. We haven't had any sites that have had to close, but I think at a high level, I'll answer that by saying we very quickly set some priorities. We basically, protecting employees was the first one. We wanted to make sure everything from stopping unnecessary travel to making sure that we had the PPEs you referenced, gloves, disinfectant, masks, splitting shifts to keep people exposed to coworkers as little as possible to accomplish the mission of the plant. And then also tracking high-risk employees. We're able to look and see what employees are either older, more likely to have severe effects from the virus, and make sure that we're tracking those individuals. I should step back and explain the structure of Mirion, which has really been a benefit operationally for us. So we operate what we call the Federalist model. So we try to maintain a very efficient corporate overhead structure, and we have 5 business units that are given quite a bit of decision authority. And what that lets us do is push that authority as close to the plant floor and as close to customers as possible, so that we can be agile in a steady state to respond to customer needs. And in this case, we started a task force early on, but basically to support the division presidents and our regional leaders. And they were able to make decisions, and changing to split shifts, for example, isn't like a decision that comes across my desk that my CEO and I have to approve. Instead, they feel the ownership already from how we're structured to move quickly. From another way, that we've viewed at Mirion for taking care of employees, and it's going to sound basic, but one of our priorities early on was to keep people employed. And so, everything from our IT department, making sure that everyone could have a laptop that needed to work from home, to making sure that we're keeping the plants open and engaging customers so that we didn't have to do massive layoffs. Because one of the biggest ways to take care of your employees in this environment is to keep them employed, right? And I think that's the one thing, if I were to point to anything that we're most proud of, is we've had very little cases across the company. We've been able to keep the plants open, and because of that, we've been able to keep most employees employed, which is good, not only just for their welfare, but also as a company to be ready to be strong when this starts to alleviate.
So split shifts, tell me about that. That's everybody from shift 1 leaves the building, and then shift 2 comes in, afterwards, so there's no intermingling?
Yeah, so we have most of our facilities run on a single shift. Some places they have 2 shifts, and it varies across our plants. But in the most basic sense, if you had one major shift, we would split that, try to distribute vital personnel across the 2 shifts, and create a space in between the handoff where you can clean and disinfect the site. And as employees come in our sites, we have temperature monitors to make sure we can detect a fever on the way in. Our leadership at the sites has stayed as separate from the floor as possible, and so to keep operations going, we wanted to take non-essential personnel, that includes in a lot of cases leadership, and keep them away from the plant floor. So if you were to go to our facility in France, for example, in the south of France in Lamennais, they were doing morning briefings to the plant floor from a second story inside the main space, so that they didn't go down to the plant floor. So it protects leadership, but also doesn't unnecessarily make extra contact points with those on the shop floor. We have other facilities that have shifted to 3 shifts and functioned more on a 6 or 7 day schedule to create enough time and space to do the cleaning and everything else that's required.
So in some cases, you've taken a plant that was normally just running 1 shift, and it sounds like you've split it into 2, such that one group will come in, work for 8 hours, and then they'll leave. Someone comes in, disinfects the building, and you have the other half of the folks come in for a second shift. So that way, if someone does come in and test positive, then it's only like half the team that might have been exposed.
Exactly. So in theory, you could, if you had someone who tested positive on shift 1, you could hold shift 1 from coming in until you fully assessed the contact points and symptoms of that group, and you could disinfect the site and function with shift 2 until you could clear the mass group of shift 1 to come back. And what that prevents is getting into a scenario where if you had a little bit of an outbreak on 1 shift and it touched, you had to pull vital employees back, you could find yourself very quickly in a case where you had to shut the facility down. And our biggest worry there is that, theoretically you could shut a facility down for a week and catch back up. But the challenge there is once people leave, it's so much harder to get back up and running. And we have some facilities that, just by the nature of what they do, we have some facilities that need to keep operations running with continuity, or you get higher levels of yield issues or quality challenges. And luckily the only cases that we've had to monitor have actually come with more of the leadership team and not on the plant floor, which has been easier to manage.
What about things like contact tracing and so forth? Are you trying to make sure that for the shift that does come in, you figure out who is close to who, so that if someone does get sick, that you would know at least what other coworkers they were close to?
Yes, and that's an area where our corporate HR has kind of supported the federalist model I referenced, and there's a specific protocol to follow in the case of anyone having symptoms or anyone showing signs of polling them on who they contacted. Our site leaders know where they are on the floor, and therefore where the highest risk is, and that allows you to be a little bit more responsive.
Okay. And an interesting point about keeping the leadership off the floor, so that both protects the workers as well as the leadership, just having as few interactions as possible between people.
Yeah, and we worried early on. A lot of our leaders have had started to work from home office, and we've had as few come into the sites as possible. And we worried, would that create frustration with people saying, "Hey, I had to come in," while others were able to stay safe at home. And I can't stress enough that theme where, and I can speak a little bit later on it, but from a cultural perspective, having that trust going into a crisis like this is really critical. And people generally recognize that the actions we were taking was to maintain a continuity of operations for employment and for our customers. And in general, I think people really responded really well to that mission focus. And even in places where, if you take France, for example, if you went on unemployment, the government's going to support 70-80% of their salary. And so a lot of factories shut down in France. We had employees that that came in and continued to work, and and didn't hesitate, right? They were given the option at different points of time of saying, hey, we can scale back if you don't feel safe. And resoundingly, everyone wanted to continue to work and continue to accomplish, the objectives of the company for customers. And that was, elevating really, really high for me personally. And that's been an incredible source of energy and pride through this challenge. You really see the talent and the commitment and the resilience of your broader team in a way that you maybe don't take time to notice on a day-to-day basis. And since I think we were doing the things to make them feel like we were doing everything we could to support them and make it safe and communicating a lot, I think that was they trusted us and continued to work, and it's gone really well.
That's great. What are some of your kind of maybe leadership lessons learned that you've had through this? Sounds like communicating regularly has been one of them. What else?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, culture and engagement. You hear companies talk a lot about employee engagement. Those aren't the types of things that you can institute, on day one of a crisis, right? You can't just say, okay, I'm going to rally the troops and I'm going to, bring this company together so everyone knows we're there for them and knows that we care about them. That has to be something that is built over time, because you need it in this environment, and it's not something that can be, instantly created. We realized we had improvements we could make on that. And so we've had a pretty robust employee engagement effort going for the last year and a half. And all of our sites have employee engagement committees, that are looking at everything from improving workflows to facility improvements that could be made, to improving break rooms, to wanting to know more about the company strategy, wanting to see or hear more from myself or the CEO or leadership. And we've really been taking that seriously. And that lesson, I'm very grateful we did that, because I think that's really important. The simple thing I think a lot of people are learning is video conferencing really, really amplifies your presence as a team and as leaders. I try to travel around to all of our sites, and it could take me 12 to 18 months in between site visits. And when we realized video conference was effective, we decided to start doing virtual site town halls and leadership meetings. So the CEO and I have been on calls with almost all of our sites, where sometimes you have anywhere from 10 to 35 people on it. And basically just telling them the company is doing great. Our customers are appreciative of the work we're doing. We want to keep employees safe. We want to keep employees employed. And then also having a chance, frankly, to say how proud we are of them and how much we care about them. And it's a huge lesson, and it's something I think will extend beyond this. But outreach and engagement doesn't have to be through an airplane and a site visit. And I think the other thing I would say, and we're trying to do this as we go, is that we're trying to collect our lessons learned as we go. If you go back to our Navy days, you'd have a problem or some sort of incident, and you'd all pull up and you'd have like the post-mortem, lessons learned, root cause analysis. What we've done is, who knows, we might be a quarter way through this, we might be halfway through this, but we've already kicked off our lesson learned activity. So I'm leading an initiative with the task force to collect lessons while we're in the crisis, while we're in the facing all of the challenges we're facing, to basically say, what are we learning? How are we actually better right now than we were before this happened? What do we want to keep doing when we're done? How could we have responded better to this crisis while we're in it, right? While it's fresh in people's heads. And that's, I think, that feels really powerful. And it feels like something that I think we could probably do a better job of going forward, is, kind of pulling lessons learned while we're in the middle of something versus waiting until we're well beyond it.
Wow, that seems like such a smart idea, and not something I've heard a lot of companies talking about. Is already starting to collect lessons learned. Are there any of those that you feel comfortable sharing with us about things that you've learned that are working well, or maybe that you do differently in the future?
Yeah, I think that I mentioned the video conferencing, which has been, very is great just from a way of working. Um, I think we have bolstered our belief in our federalist model. Everyone has universally said that I think we're responding better because our authority is distributed, and there's no bureaucracy standing in the way of doing things. I think the way that we engage customers, so we usually, for a lot of the equipment that we sell, customers have to come into the sites to do factory acceptance testing.
Uh-huh.
We've actually been able to do a lot of that through virtual means, through video conferences. So, if you're selling a product out of Connecticut to Korea, and instead of waiting for that travel and the logistics to work, you can actually do a virtual factory acceptance testing in your facility. That's something that, could make us more responsive in the future to deliveries.
Yeah.
And it's all, I think our sales team has mentioned, they're engaging with customers in a maybe more impactful way as the customers get more comfortable with video conferencing. So, being able to be in more places at once than they previously had been. I
That is
think
so cool. I love that. I mean, because that suggests that also it's good for the customer in the future. Maybe they say, well, geez, we don't actually have to fly a technician all the way from Korea to Connecticut just to like accept the new dosimeter machine. Because that saves everybody money.
Yeah, and sometimes, there have been a number of times where you come up on the end of a quarter and you end up missing due to a delay in customer acceptance testing, and to be able to be more responsive, and it helps with forecasting and timing and other things, I think, in the future too. And it's one of those things that's been really energizing to watch. I mentioned just the pride of our team and our employees, but we really aspire to be a lean culture, and the basic lean concept of having employees be a part of solutions and improvement of work on a day-to-day basis. In this type of crisis, you really see creativity, and it's not just operationally. When we were doing these town hall calls, I'm hearing about our services team. In order to keep together as a unit, they're doing one of our service teams did a virtual talent show with their group, and they didn't let us join or video it for record, but it's just that people are being more creative, more inventive on how to both get the work done, how to engage customers, but also how to engage each other. And it's hard to quantify that, but that's the part I'm most excited about, because on the back end of this, it'll make us tighter as a business. We're 2,500 employees spread across the globe, and that this is exciting. I think
Wow.
that brings up another thought on lessons learned. COVID is a very serious crisis. Business on a day-to-day basis is a very serious, task, and we tend to sometimes take it all too seriously. And one of the things I've seen on video calls related a little bit to that talent show thing is, I think we're succeeding in a lot of ways because we're finding ways to have fun. When we join a executive committee call and someone's wearing a funny hat, or we keep it light with jokes when we can. You can't survive something that's this stressful. A lot of people at home working with their kids, trying to manage school with both parents working, and you can't do that and then jump on a call and be completely serious and locked in all day long for months through this crisis. And that's also been a lesson. I think we're better for being able to laugh and engage in a fun way as a team too.
So it sounds like, are there some of these new ways of working that you expect to just continue post coronavirus?
Yeah, I think some of the things we're doing right now, we might keep in place just from a safety perspective. So I think we'll try, we'll obviously try to get back to higher levels of utilization in our facilities when there's a normalization period here. But I think we will keep in mind and try to keep some employees working remotely where it's prudent, evaluate the shift structure just so that, if there is, we want to maintain a defensive posture in case you have a spike or something, degrades from the COVID perspective. I absolutely think from a way of doing business point of view, we are going to leverage this video conferencing much more effectively. And if you think about it, this stuff's been around for decades, but until this, no one broke through that awkwardness of seeing someone's guest bedroom or their kitchen or their kids coming in and out of the screen or what have you, and breaking that discomfort down and being comfortable with the medium has, I think, really opened up. I don't think we know all of the ways that it's going to make us better and more efficient going forward.
That's so cool. Mike, where can people go to find out more about your company or yourself? If you want to give a website or your Twitter handle, any other links, we can also include them in the show notes, but where can people go to find out more?
Yeah, I think the best place is Mirion.com. We've done a lot of work on the website over time, and so you can get a really good view of our products and our company on the website. I won't give out my Twitter handle because I don't think people need to hear me rant about the Detroit Lions or sports complaints. But yeah, our website has been really overhauled and is a great source of information for our products and the company.
All right, fantastic. Well, Mike, I feel encouraged after this discussion. I'm really enthusiastic about some of the lessons learned that you've had, and just encouraged. Sounds like great culture that you're building there, and thank you so much for joining the call today.
Well, thanks, Will, and I might leave the audience with just the ability to try to be positive on all this. I know everyone's facing a lot of challenges, and this is uniquely a challenging time. And to the extent that we all can find ways to find silver linings and better ways of doing business, or even just the simple things of taking care of ourselves through this so we can be there for our teams. I just hope everyone's able to be safe and do a little bit of that, so it's not just doom and gloom all the time, because I do think we'll learn a lot out of this.
I agree. Thank you for that. Mike, great having you on the show.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. Well, thanks for having me.